Metroid podcast. My name is Andy Spiteri, joined, as always, by Dakota Lasky. Dak, how you doing, man?
I'm not doing too bad, man. I'm doing all right. I was actually going to go yesterday on a socially distanced hike with some friends I hadn't seen in a little bit, and that got canceled, so I was a little bummed about that. But I'm not bummed because now we're here to talk about some Metroid, or I guess not talk about Metroid today, actually, but another game that's really good, and we'll be making a certain case for it in terms of, well, we'll get into it. But yeah, anyway, I'm doing all right. How you doing, Andy?
I'm doing pretty good. It's the first snowfall of the year here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, so everyone's driving like an a-hole, and you swear they'd never seen snow before, but can't complain. I got my furnace going. I usually turn it off when I record, but I don't feel like sitting in the cold today, so I got that going. And I'm pretty excited to get into our Inspired by Metroid game today. It feels like for the last couple of weeks we've been trying to get to it, but frankly, this is just such a big game with so much to do that it took a little bit longer than we thought to really kind of get in and do all the nitty gritty and explore every facet of the game. So, man, I am excited to talk about Batman Arkham Asylum. I forgot how much I loved this game. I just love this game.
This is a game that I think came out, I don't know, I should have looked this up beforehand, but like around a decade ago. And
2009, yeah.
2009, yeah, okay. So this is a game I feel like almost everybody played at the time. It's such a big deal. I remember when it came out and like leading up to it, and getting like the voice actors from the animated series, and doing this like legit like superhero game that like was took the source material seriously and played really well. It wasn't just like a movie tie-in, and wasn't just something that made to kind of be there on the shelves. But this is a game that I enjoyed a lot when it first came out. I haven't played it in a long time, so I'm very excited and happy that we got to talk about it, and that I was able to go back and play it a little bit in preparation for this episode.
Yeah, so I should probably mention, I have like 3 big loves in my life. The first is Zelda, the second is Metroid, and the third is Batman. So like,
I did not know
Batman. I'm a really, really big Batman fan. I have my comic fandom kind of tapered off a little bit when I just like legit didn't have enough money to keep collecting both comics and video games. So I chose video games, but like I think I have almost every single Batman graphic novel up until about 2014. So like I have 3 shelves full of graphic novels full of Batman stuff. I have tons of Batman paraphernalia. I really like the extended Batverse too. Like you've got like your Nightwings and your Red Hoods. Catwoman I think is really cool. So like I really love Batman, and like to me, I remember back in the day, when the renaissance of Batman started happening, kind of around 2005 with Batman Begins. It was a new presentation. It was a new direction for Batman. Of course, The Dark Knight came out and just completely changed everything in terms of superhero movies. And, this game came out a year later, 2009, and I think you could undisputably say, like, at the time, this was the best superhero video game ever made. Like, we'd had some cool games on the N64, like the Spider-Man ones, but you know what? You could maybe even go further and say, like, this might be up there with the best licensed video games ever made, like ever. I felt like really strongly about that at the time, and I think I still might stick to that actually. But yeah, it was so cool seeing The Dark Knight kind of in video game fashion. It was serious, it was fun, it was treated like a really big deal, and yeah, I was so excited to play this game back in the day when it came out.
I really can't believe that I didn't know you were a big Batman fan up until today. If we've been doing this show for how long? I knew that you obviously like Metroid and Zelda, but this Batman thing I didn't know. I've never been like an absolutely huge Batman fan. Like I like Batman, but I don't think I've ever been like a crazy huge fan of any one particular comic book franchise. If anything, I like the movies, right? Like I watched the Dark Knight and Batman Begins and the whole trilogy and all that. But I was really more. It was more so like the spectacle of it being this like really big, like as you said, like one of the best licensed games ever made. Like when it was coming out as a whole big spectacle, like of this game being taken seriously, like the franchise being taken seriously in like video game form alongside with the movies, and like it looked like a really solid game too. So like that was what attracted to me. I was never like I gotta play this because it's Batman. Though that was a little bit of it, right? Because Batman is cool. But wow, I actually I can't believe I didn't know that about you, Andy. But
I guess I never mentioned it really. Like
I guess you never did.
I mean, like I said, like I kind of I was collecting comics, but it tapered off because I was just too broke to keep doing it. But you know, I will tweet a picture of all my Batman graphic novels, my like Batman toys. I've got like
share with us
a 3-foot Batman little dude in my living room, like one of those toy ones that you could get at Toys R Us or whatever. So yeah, I really like him, and I really like I said, like Nightwing is a really big. I'm a really big fan of Nightwing. For anyone who doesn't know, Nightwing is the original Robin who kind of went on to become his own hero. And I have like a big collection of Green Lantern comics as well, like particularly the Jeff Johns stuff from the early like 2010s, 2011s, stuff like that. So yeah, I was pretty big into it for a long time. So you know, this was a really big deal for this game to come out and be as good as it was. But I guess maybe we should step back and answer the question that I think is on a lot of people's minds and be like, okay, that's great. We all like Batman Arkham Asylum, but what the heck does it have to do with Metroid? And I think that just on the surface level, I mean, they don't look like they have a lot in common, but when you start to play Arkham Asylum, the very fundamentals of a Metroidvania game are so interwoven into this game that it's actually like it's staggering. It's one of the best 3D Metroidvanias that I can think of. So I'm excited to kind of, you know, put out the case for it about why it's one of the better 3D Metroidvanias, and you know, we'll talk about how this maybe is a little bit more like Metroid than you might initially think. And I think that, you know, I guess first of all, I wanted to say too. So I fired up my old Xbox 360 Batman Arkham Asylum disc and was playing this game for the first time since 2013 was my last save file. So long time ago. But the first thing that you notice about this game, which you'll notice about any good Metroidvania, is the atmosphere is just off the charts. Like, it's so atmospheric, it's like it's sweltering, it's oozing. Like, the setting really is a character. And I think that when you look at the best Metroidvania games, you can also say that, like, you know, the forest in Ori and the Blind Forest feels like a living character. The planet Zebes feels like a living character. And I think that Arkham Island just really encapsulates that atmospheric tone that we expect from a Metroid game.
Yeah, for sure. I think when I first started like playing around in Arkham Island again at the beginning, I was like, oh, like a rainy like overworld exterior with some green here and there. Like, this is town overworld. Here we go. Like, we're right here in the Metroid game. Yeah, I would agree with that for the most part. I wouldn't say like that's like the biggest thing for me in terms of like what makes something a Metroidvania, but like for sure, like the location itself where you play like has just as much character as like the people you're encountering in the game and who you talk to and who you're playing as. And at least with you know Arkham,
I don't mean to say it's like the biggest thing, but it's just the thing that I noticed like right away.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like right when you start it up and you start getting to explore it. I think it also helps too that at least for anyone who knows Batman stuff, like there's a lot that you don't have to read into it too much because like you get like you're immediately in a place that is very well known to Batman fans and like has a lot like just by looking at it like there's so much history in a lot of places and tells you a lot about like what's to come, which I think is cool. And you know, for someone who wasn't the biggest Batman fan but still went into it, I was like, wow, this is really sick. And it was like, yeah, living, breathing. I mean,
there is like Easter eggs doesn't even begin to describe. There's so much stuff to find, there's so much stuff to do, and it's so like it's a love letter to Batman fans.
Right.
But yeah, the atmosphere of the asylum is off the chart. And I think that, you know, you mentioned this earlier, but one of the low-key like reasons for this game's success is that, they went and they got Kevin Conroy. They went and they got Mark Hamill. And they had voiced Batman and the Joker on the animated series and were so well established. And that just brought such a credibility to the game that I think that it really helped it, be taken seriously. Particularly, the entire voice cast is quite good. But I mean, those two in particular are just phenomenal. And they're phenomenal because they've been doing the Joker and they've been doing Batman for, almost 20 years at the point that Arkham Asylum was made. So I think that is also a very important factor into this game's success.
Absolutely. I wish Metroid games had more voice acting, to be honest. But I don't know if there's anyone as good. I mean, imagine Mark Hamill doing a Metroid character. Like, Metroid wishes having that kind of lineup, right? Though I guess this, if you're listening to this episode, you might have already played through the game entirely. I think the voices for everyone is done really well, except at the end, in the very end boss battle where you fight the Titan like Joker, right? Like, he's all like beefed up and whatever, but he still has the same Mark Hamill voice as he did when he was like just regular scrawny Joker. That was the only thing that threw me off, since you brought up voice acting. But otherwise, yeah, that was really cool having that, because I immediately recognized them, and I was like, wow, that's like so. I mean, even back then too, but obviously I played it, but like back then I was like, wow, this is like cool to get like the real deal, and it wasn't just like someone who was doing an impression or someone who was kind of there but didn't really have the exact same sound. Like, I thought that was really awesome.
Yeah, totally. Actually, I'm glad that you brought up the final boss battle, because I do want to talk about that later in the show when we get there. But I kind of agree with you that that's my critique of the game, is that boss battle is a little bit off. But I want to go back to kind of the structure of Arkham Island and how it's kind of like it's setting up to be like your typical 3D Metroidvania world. This is kind of a good example, I think, of what, a lot of people say that, like, should Metroid Prime 4 be open world and stuff like that. And I think that Arkham Island is kind of a good example of how to do that, but still make it small enough where, like, it's, it's still the same kind of idea where it's not completely open world, but there's still like little segments that you can choose to go into whenever you want. Like, I think that the way that they have, like, your larger Arkham Island, and then they have like the little subsections that you can go into, like Arkham Manor or the Botanical Gardens or the Penitentiary or whatever. I feel like this is kind of a good blueprint for how an open world Metroid game could work, where like you can have that giant area, but it's still interconnected to a sense, but then it can lead you deeper into what we would typically know in Metroid as, like, a separate little area, which would be, like I mentioned, like the gardens or penitentiary or something like that. So I think that the structure of this is really clever. They have the 5 different areas, but like you still have that one overall arc that kind of ties it all together. I think that it's done really well.
Yeah, the hub world is fashioned appropriately for how the game works, right? Like, that's like your main area that you branch off into, and then I would say the game isn't like super open world. Like, it is somewhat linear. Like, you are kind of following a line from one location to the other because of how often you have like objectives. But and in a lot of ways, I feel like it already does kind of feel like how like Metroid Prime was structured, in a way where you have that hub area and then you go in between all these different locations. In fact, you're definitely exploring a lot more in like the case of like a Metroid game than you are in this game. I think for the most part, you're not like getting lost anywhere, because there's always some kind of objective to accomplish. And I would say, in terms of how this feels like a Metroidvania, that was something that felt like not like a Metroidvania to me. It was like there was a lot of like, you're immediately going here, you're told exactly what to do in a lot of situations, even though you are kind of exploring in a way. But yeah, I like how the game is set up, like around the the central hub Arkham Island area, and you get to go to all these different interconnected areas that are not only connected by the main hub world, but also through like a sewage like passage or something like that, and allowing you to like take a different way. And so the game doesn't feel like super backtracky, even though you do go back to a bunch of different areas you've been to a couple times towards the latter parts of the game.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that's really missing is like going straight from like the penitentiary to Arkham Manor or something like that. Like, the little subsections don't have a direct way of getting to each other. You have to go back to the hub world. But I do like that the way the world is set up. I mean, you're definitely right. Like, you do have more of a set objective of where you should go. But I mean, honestly, that's a change that I could see coming to Metroid regardless. Like, we've kind of seen games like Hollow Knight or Ori be a little bit more objective forced and say, like, this is where you need to go, this is what you need to do, while still kind of letting you explore and go where you want. So, like, I could see that change coming to Metroid as well.
Yeah, I think this game, well, this is Arkham Asylum, a game that like I feel like inspired so many games for the past decade, right? Like I wouldn't be surprised if Metroid Prime 4 picked up some things eventually. But this game, while it certainly was inspired by like Metroidvania elements, like the fighting style we saw was like taken from that fighting style that we get, like the combat system in this game is used in so many other games afterward, and how you traverse like an open world and like all the objectives and whatnot, are things that definitely influence other games too. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Metroid Prime 4 picked up some things. But in terms of this game, at least a lot of things that stuck out to me, like immediately when I first started like replaying it, and I'm thinking like, what makes this game like Metroidvania-ish, right? Like more than just like, okay, like there's a map and I'm going around and accessing all these areas and accomplishing objectives and whatever that is. And the obvious stuff like, okay, there's like items you can get that allow you to get to new areas and stuff like that. So you have like your grapple and the line shot and all, and your gadgets that Batman gets access to and whatnot. Other things that stuck out to me that immediately I would feel like this is stuff that makes it feel like a Metroidvania are the audio logs and scans you can get, and how you can scan your area to figure out what's going on next, and finding these specific things in like the collectibles and the Riddler trophies and the Joker's teeth. There are stealth sections. There's different visors like the X-rays and whatnot, and being able to see the area and like plan it out like with your bat vision and whatnot, as well as getting different gadgets to get you to a bunch of different areas. So like those like stuff like that, like those gameplay features that like you're immediately introduced to alongside being introduced to Arkham Island, like that's the kind of stuff that like immediately stuck out to me as like, wow, yeah, this is like the Metroid influence right here. Like getting your different upgrades and gadgets, going to different parts of the map with those accessible, like different ways of like perceiving these areas, the scans, the logs, and all of that immediately ringed as like Metroid to me.
Yeah, totally. Like, and a lot of what you said, I would echo. Like, it's the most obvious Metroid staple is like, you see the item or the collectible, you don't have the tools to get it. You go and play the game. You acquire a new item, which lets you come back to the collectible later in the game. Now you have the tools to get it, so you can collect it. And like that is everywhere in Arkham Asylum. And like there's really only about half a dozen like items that Batman gets that lets him like utilize different areas or go to different areas or do different things. But I think that they implement that really well. And like the big thing for me that makes it really feel Metroid-esque is the item collection. And like you nailed it, there's so much to collect, and it's such a love letter to Batman fans. There's riddles that you can solve, there's tapes that you can get, there's the Joker teeth, there's the lore of Arkham, that statues that you can find, and you can actually find like the little Riddler sheets which kind of pinpoint where those are on the map, which reminds me of when you're playing 2D Metroid and you go into a tile and you can see like the little circle in it, and like, okay, well, there's something here. So I think that the game does a really good job of doing that. And another thing that really makes it like a standout Metroidvania to me is it has a really strong map. And I know that sounds dumb, but like it can't be overstated like how important a good map is if you're going to be a good Metroidvania game. So this one has a really good map. It's easy to follow. It's you can see where exactly all of the Riddler challenges are. It is just vague enough though to tell you where it is, not how to get it. So it points you in the right direction but doesn't hold your hand. I thought that this feature was really, really good, and I'm hoping that we see Metroid Prime 4 kind of bring that back. We had something similar in Metroid Prime 3, but I think that this is really like, it's really important, and I think that Arkham Asylum just like really nails like how the map is presented, how it shows the items in correlation to where you are on the map, and how it treats like your upgrades, because you do backtrack and you do come back to the same areas a bunch of different times, but every time that you come back, it's usually fairly drastically different, either because the terrain has changed, particularly when poison ivy's plants go crazy,
Yeah.
or because you have a new item and you have a new way of traversing that particular area. So yeah, lots of really clever things that Arkham Asylum does to like really, it really leans into being a Metroid game, but instead of like items or missiles or whatever, it's like it gives you Batman lore, which is really really cool. So like it's kind of funny because like the more it leans into Metroid, the more it also leans into Batman. So I think that it just does a really smart job of doing this.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think this is such like a fan servicey Batman game too, because there's so many they cram so many different Batman like things and ideas into this game. It's like, oh, this person's showing up. This person, like, oh, I recognize them. I recognize them. Like, oh, everyone's in this game apparently, and which I thought was really cool though too. It definitely fit with the theme of like, all right, we're making like the ultimate Batman game, right? And it certainly spoke to that. And you mentioned when like poison ivy is infecting, like her vines and roots are everywhere, and like you go around like Arkham Island and you can see them all over the place. I thought that was such a cool part. I love that part of the game, specifically because I thought one thing that stood out to me is that a lot of the locations kind of felt and looked the same a lot of the time. Like they're just these kind of like gray, like warehousey kind of feeling areas. Even like the labs and the mansion don't seem too different, but the botanical garden and like the sewers beneath that, I liked that part of the game even back when I first played it, because it was like different and there was some water running and all that, and the poison ivy boss was pretty cool too. So, and the bosses, and I feel like we gotta get to this at some point. The bosses in this game are certainly something. There are some crazy sequences.
Oh yeah, we'll get to that.
It's crazy
we
sequences.
Will get to that.
But you're right. I like how the game like shifts and gives you like new means to get to different places, but more or less like you got to go through some places a few times, and now you have different tools to give like work on your game plan, which was something I always remembered about this game, which I felt expanded on what I wish Metroid would do a little more. Is like give you more options into like entering an area and like how you want to deal with it, right? Like, do you want to be stealthy and take everyone out, like really like nice and Metal Gear Solid like, or you're just gonna go out swinging, or you're gonna use a bunch of like gadgets and explosive whatever. I feel like a lot of the time in Metroid, when you enter like a room, more or less there's like one obvious way to like play through it, like whether you're avoiding something or you gotta kill stuff, you just run in and start mashing, something like that. I feel like there isn't like too much strategy. Like I wish there was more I would just say it this way: I wish there was more strategy in going into like a certain area in a Metroid game, especially like the Prime games too, but even in a 2D Metroid. And I feel like this game like always tackled that problem so well. It's like giving you options to do stuff, especially when you go back to a room multiple times, and how you want to traverse that room each time. And so this game did that so well, and I always remember that about this, especially when I played it back then, but then going back to this game now, everything just feels so fluid, and it gives you like, like a dynamic means to approach the game how you want it,
Yeah, I agree actually. And one of the things that I think this game does like really well is it illustrates like the detective side of Batman.
Yeah.
Because you can see him like analyze crime scenes, follow clues and stuff like that. Like you said, there are some areas in the game where like, I mean, you can go in with your fists flying and like try and take down these goons with guns, but like it's so much more rewarding if you take them down stealthily, and you have tons of options with how to do that. You can line them up, you can blow them up, you could do a ton of different things. And I think that this game is like really really good at kind of empowering you in different ways to do a lot of things. And like it feels like you're working like smart a lot of the time rather than working hard, if that makes sense, because like you're really just like outthinking all your opponents. Like, yes, you're the Batman and you kick butt, but also like you kind of know that you're no match for a bunch of different guns, and you can do things a bunch of different ways and take them out, and be the detective, be the smartest detective in the world or whatever. So I think that this game does a really good job of doing that. I will say though that I do love the combat in this game. There are some times where like I just go and beat up people. It's so simple, but it's so satisfying. Like it's just like some of the combos and stuff, they look kind of hokey, especially when you're doing like the finishing moves and it slows down, but like there's something just so satisfying about it to me that I love the fighting in here. You know, it feels awesome when you're on like that 30 hit combo or whatever. You're just flying around all over the place. So I think that they really did a good job with the combat. And actually, even in Arkham City, when you have like you can control Robin or you can control Nightwing or Catwoman, I thought that was really fun in that game as well. So I really love the combat of the Arkham series just in general. It's like simple but satisfyingly fun.
Honestly, Batman like kind of puts Samus to shame with some of his moves, like the way he just like is flipping around people, breaking arms, and doing all these crazy moves, like way better than what Samus was able to pull off in like Other M or Samus Returns or something like that. Though to be fair, those sequences are also sick. Yeah, the combat has always been so satisfying in these games, and admittedly, it's certainly one of the things that is like the least reminiscent of a Metroidvania game. Like
Yeah,
when you look at gameplay of this game, right? Like it's different than like Blasphemous, right? Where it's very clearly, like when you look at you like gameplay wise and just like you take a glance at the game, it's very much inspired by Metroidvania. But like looking at this game, you wouldn't really tell, even while if you like watch someone go around and beat people up, because that part of the game isn't very close to it. But that's what I love about this game, is that it takes the formula and does more or different things with it. Now, how could you translate like the actual like a 2D like Metroid game to this? Like obviously there are going to be differences, but I love how this system like really worked with like the flow of the game, because it made Batman not only feel like he was smart, but he was strong too, right? And he could just go in there and like smoothly like have sense of where everyone is in a fight, and like moving and dodging and doing all these like he feels like strong and can take on multiple people at a time, and does so, which Samus feels as well. But I love that about Arkham Asylum, is that it does take the formula in a lot of ways, like the items and scans and opening up different parts of the map, but then does its own thing with like the combat system, and obviously going into the Batman lore, which it does, as you mentioned earlier, very well and handedly. But yeah, you're right, I love the combat system in this game. It makes it so much fun. At times feels a bit mashy, but you got to be smarter when you're playing with like more enemies, and like, or you're in a boss battle who has like, you have a bunch of guys who are running around as you have the one larger dude charging at you from across the map. Like, you can't just like, you got to be a little smart about it. It's not like Shadow of Mordor where you just have like an invincible dodge, or like Other M, we have like an invincible dodge move. Wow. Which I always hated. This game, yeah, very fun, so satisfying, and I think you said it was hokey. I disagree. I love the zoom in. I always loved the ragdoll zoom in when you just knock someone clean and they just like crumple to the ground at the end of the fight.
It's so hokey, but it's great. It's so
So
awesome,
good.
especially when you miss and like Batman's foot is like 4 feet away from his head, but he still like goes down. Yeah, that's good stuff. And you know what? I'm okay. Like, I mean, this is obviously inspired by Metroid. It's not a one-for-one copy of Metroid. So I'm okay with the combat existing in here as kind of its own thing. I don't know that I'd want to see, like, that transitioned over to Metroid Prime or a 2D Metroid or whatever, but I do love it. It is mashy, but something satisfyingly crunchy about just, like, beating the crap out of all these goons that always gives me the good feels. I want to give, actually, a particular shout-out to the riddles in this game. That was one of my like favorite things to do, is just like find the clues or follow the clues and go and like try and see if I could find like that little piece of the environment and scan it or whatever. I thought that this was like a really brilliant way to kind of like get immersed in that world even more so. Like you're looking all over for this little hint of what the Riddler has told you. It could be a little nod to the Penguin or a little nod to Clayface or something like that. But I thought that this really brought out a lot of, kind of like a lot of the, not the underside, but it gave the world a lot more personality. And it was really fun for me. So I really enjoyed that. So I wanted to give that a particular shout out. The trophies and stuff were really fun, but I had a really good time getting all the riddles in particular.
I like the patient logs. I always thought the patient logs were really cool. Give you a lot of insight to the other characters. By the way, on those Riddler trophies, do you know who Brian Alvarez is, Andy?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do.
Does he not sound like a young Brian Alvarez? I swear, every time he was talking, I thought I was listening to his radio show. I'm like, dude, is this guy like, is this really Brian Alvarez like talking about like
Okay.
Batman stuff right now? Go back and listen and tell me he doesn't sound like a young Brian Alvarez. Any wrestling fans, if you played the game or you haven't played it in a while, go back and listen to his voice and tell me he doesn't sound like him. Sorry, I just had to get this. I had to get that off my chest.
You know what?
Because I agree
I
otherwise.
could see that. I could see that. And shout out to Brian Alvarez's rant on the Earth being flat. That was hilarious.
Yes, I'm a big.
That's
I'm a
good
big
stuff.
fan. I'm a big fan. Yeah, but otherwise, I always like that aspect of being able to like go around the map and have a reason to go around and go to every like nook and cranny and corner of a map, right? So in Metroid, like a Metroidvania kind of game, a lot of the time it is like collectibles to whether it's missile upgrades or whatever it is. And in this game, yeah, like it's more to like, as you said earlier, like adds to the lore, right? Like that's your collectibles, which and gives you more of like immersing you in like the Batman experience to give you more information. And I thought that was great for the kind of game it is, right? And I liked all that kind of stuff. I loved getting the patient audio logs, and like the Harley Quinn ones are really cool. And like her like
Yes.
going through like her like at like interviews and whatnot and all that. And like the different character bios. I thought all that stuff was cool. Like the teeth
I
is
thought the
just like,
Spirit of Arkham ones were really cool too.
yeah, there was so much cool stuff to go through. So like as a Batman fan, I'm sure that's like stuff you absolutely love. And for me, who knows these kind of characters, doesn't like really know too much about them. Like I thought back then it was really cool to like get all this insight and learn more about these characters. So I just kind of like somewhat knew about, but I really love like listening and hearing all that kind of stuff when you're given that kind of option in a game. So yeah, I was totally with that. I love the need to and the motivation to explore the map as much as possible, and the reward was really awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I loved the audio tapes and like when I was thinking like what I want Metroid to kind of steal from Batman Arkham Asylum, it was basically that, like the audio tapes, and in particular how you see Batman kind of talk to Oracle. I was
A
just
lot
like,
of
man,
talking
if
in this
Metroid
game.
could take one thing, yeah. But the good thing is that you can move while you're listening. So like I'm thinking to myself like, man, if let's just imagine that they remade Metroid Fusion. Like if you could just talk to Adam while you're moving, the way that the Batman is talking to Oracle, like that would completely change the game for me. And like imagine like and I know that they're kind of overdone in 2020, but I think that they're just like really effective. Like you can find audio tapes or audio logs or whatever. Like imagine you're on an alien planet, there's a crashed ship, and you can find all of these different audio logs that tells you exactly what happened to this crashed ship in the next Metroid Prime game. Like I just think that that would really add to the experience. Like having that voice cast, having that voice acting would like really add to Metroid. So yeah, that was one of my really big takeaways. It's like, man, I just hope that Prime 4 and even the next 2D Metroid just like really like leans into this and embraces it, because I think it just adds a sense of atmosphere, a sense of realism, a sense of like character to everything that's happening.
So I think that's so interesting you bring that up, because I feel like that would go against like for a Metroid Prime game, like that feeling of isolation if you're constantly like listening to someone talking in your ear and some audio log, right? Like, or do you not feel that way?
No, I mean, I think that you can still have a sense of isolation while you're listening to, while you're listening to a voice log, because I mean, that person presumably is dead, right? Like you can still be alone, but you're kind of piecing together the mystery of what happened. Like to me, it's almost like, it's basically the same thing as finding like, Chozo lore or pirate data or something like that. It's just that it's being spoken aloud and you can keep moving instead of like stopping, reading, continuing. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. I was curious how you felt, because yeah, I agree. I don't think it necessarily like cuts into it entirely. Like it reminds me a lot of what I just recently played, Halo 3 ODST, where when you're playing as the rookie and you're walking around the streets of New Mombasa, you can find these audio logs from that take place like during the invasion and whatnot, and all the acts transpiring in Halo 2. And you still feel that like feeling of isolation, like almost helplessness, because you can't intervene in the story you're hearing. And I like that element, and it doesn't necessarily take away from it. But I was curious how you felt, because you know, I still feel like having like co-op or some kind of like other character in the campaign would be cool. I don't know if that would cut into the isolation of Metroid Prime 4 anyway. But yeah, I agree. Having audio logs is something that's worked well in so many other games. You know, I think of like BioShock, you know, also another great FPS game or something like that that has a lot of like audio logs that you listen to. And it's almost like interesting that Metroid Prime 4 hasn't got, or like Metroid Prime hasn't gotten into that. But to be fair, the last Metroid Prime game was back in 2007, so you know, it's been a while. But even in like the 2D Metroids, I like being able to find more information and about like what has happened, like the lore of and the history of like my surroundings, and like you said at the beginning, at the top of the episode, right? Like the character of your surroundings, right, and your environment, like where you are as like a living, breathing character, and audio logs and stuff like that really you know, aid that kind of feeling.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, like we saw that in Axiom Verge. Like you can find little bits of information about the world. Granted, those particular pieces in Axiom Verge were nonsense and they didn't make a whole lot of sense. But like I think that they had the right idea, where like you could find like the little tidbits or whatever. And to me, just having that spoken aloud and like you can keep moving, I think that that makes a lot of sense. Like yeah, it's a little bit overdone now in 2020, but I mean it's effective, which is why it's done so often. So I think that that could be a really, really important piece for the next Metroid game. And like that, yeah, it stood out to me watching, or I guess listening to all the audio tapes of all the different villains. You kind of get a little bit more personality. You kind of figure out like why some of the things are the way that they are. And I really hope that Metroid kind of steals that in its next game, 2D or 3D, either one. One thing that I did want to bring up, which I always really, really loved about the Arkham games, is I think that they strike a perfect balance between like gritty realism, but also like the more fantastical like elements of Batman. So like, you know, Christopher Nolan's movies are amazing, but like they're very much like realistic and they have to exist in a world where it's like, could this happen feasibly in the real world? Where the Arkham games aren't grounded by that. You can still have like a realistic, you know, somewhat setting, somewhat island. You have the Joker and whatever, but like you also have Poison Ivy, like, and her plants are going crazy. She can control plants. You have like Killer Croc, who's literally a big crocodile. Like, I think that this game really strikes that balance really well for me as a Batman fan.
Yeah, and this could arguably be one of those things that might line up with like the Inspired by Metroid, right? Where Metroid has this kind of feel where it feels like it happens in like a realistic kind of world, but has these fantastical elements in it, right? Where, you know, it's a sci-fi, like, seems like it could happen, but there are, you know, chozos and whatnot, and like, and all the different kind of species of aliens that could seem like fantastical, and some of Samus's abilities and things she like runs into, and the settings and all of that, and like chozo ghosts and whatnot. That's something that also I 100% agreed with, right? Because it's not like Metroid like is 100% realistic or gritty, and this game isn't either. It's not like it's not like the Dark Knight the game, right? It's very much more suited towards like the comics and the cartoons and all of that, and the animated series, whatnot. By the way, shout outs to one of my favorite, Batman Beyond. That's my favorite animated Batman series. Anyway, but
dude, how do we not have a Batman Beyond game yet? I was just tweeting about this the other day.
I love Batman Beyond. It's so awesome. I agree there should be a Batman Beyond game. I always thought Batman Beyond was sick.
Yeah, Batman Beyond is sick. He is so cool. Such a good show.
Absolutely.
Anyways, I'm sorry.
And also another show that was great around that time was Static Shock, and apparently Michael B. Jordan, right? That's his name. Yeah. He's producing a Static Shock film. Very excited about that because I love Static Shock.
I think that's going to be super cool, man. Super cool.
Yeah, another great show from around that same time period. Anyway, but going back to what you're saying, yeah, I agree. This game like rides that line between like real and fantasy, like in a great way that Batman, for the most part, almost always does. But I always that had like a feel of Metroid-ness to me as well. Where, like there's some scientific elements, there's some fantastical elements and whatnot that give it that same kind of flair. Even though obviously Metroid's more sci-fi than Batman is, but there are sci-fi elements of Batman for sure. Maybe not something as like directly inspired. Like if you look at these kind of games, like the things that seem more tangible in terms of like that Metroid inspiration, or like, you know, the map and how you traverse the areas and and things like that, and scans and information and puzzles and the gadgets. But when you think about it in this kind of way, like, this seems to have that bit of a Metroidvania feel to it as well.
Yeah, that's such a great observation. I didn't put that together, but like you're totally right. They totally kind of exist in that same perfect area. So yeah, I think that's such a good observation. Okay, I have one critique of this game.
Okay.
Actually, I have two critiques, but here's my first one. Tell me if you agree with me or not. One thing that I think they could have maybe done is limit the use of detective mode. Because like, and for anybody that yet hasn't played this, detective mode is like Batman can zap on his cowl and like you can see all the pieces of the environment that you interact with are highlighted. All the enemies are highlighted. You could literally just play the entire game in detective mode and you'd have a much easier time seeing everything. But like, I feel like maybe it's too much of a crutch in this game, and maybe they should have put a timer on it, or a recharge, or like something. I don't know. I feel like a lot of times, like, I find myself wanting to look at the environment, which I do kind of agree with you. Like, the environment, you know, one kind of blends or bleeds into the other a little bit, but I do still want to look at it. But, you know, it's just easier to have detective mode on because then you can see where the Riddler trophies are or where your next enemy is or et cetera, et cetera. So that is a critique that I think I would say this game, or I would make of this game.
I've never really thought about that because I guess how I always thought about it, or I guess, well, like, I just assumed is like, you're Batman, you're supposed to have a tactical advantage, right? Like, he can go into detective mode and have all this stuff available at all times. Like, should he not be, like, how could he not have like a gadget that like works all the time, or like that's on a cooldown? I don't know. I never had a problem with that. It's again similar to like Halo 3 ODST, where you have visor mode and it like highlights and shows you enemies a lot easier in like the dark. And I guess like that makes sense because like I'm a space marine and I would have that kind of technology. So I understand what you're saying though. It could be like a crutch. I didn't find myself using it like 100% of the time though, but yeah, at the same time, I do feel like it'd be kind of weird if it was on a cooldown. I guess like they didn't want to like limit players. Like, this game is a lot about like having a lot of different freedoms in terms of how you want to approach stuff, and you being Batman, right? And has Batman ever had like cooldowns on his stuff he uses? Like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like a superhero kind of thing. Maybe that's how they were looking at it. But I see what you're saying, right? It wasn't a big issue for me, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's not a big issue for me either. And I feel like you're probably right. It probably would have been a little bit weird to have, like, a cooldown on your own visor. But,
right.
I don't know.
Like, imagine you had a cooldown on, like,
something.
the X-ray visor in Metroid Prime.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't that be annoying?
Yeah.
But I guess you wouldn't want to use the X-ray
know.
visor all the time in, like, the regular gameplay anyway. So I don't know. Maybe it's not the best analogy.
Maybe what they could have done is, like, limit or, like, have some kind of drawback to using it where like you can see but like maybe your scope of vision is a little bit narrower or something. I don't really know. It doesn't really matter. It's a small little critique, but it did stick out to me then, and it stuck out to me when I played it. Let's go over to the villains here in the game because, you know, Batman is awesome, but, you know, just as awesome is his rogues gallery. I thought that they did a really, really good job of picking the villains for this game. They only really went with, like, I would say, like, you have Joker as your main villain. He's your undisputed, like, main big-time player villain. And the rest of them were, like, they were big names, but they weren't big enough where it felt like, okay, like, we've got, like, a million different villains in this game. They were more, like, supporting villains, I thought, if that makes sense. And, you know, keep in mind, at the time, Harley Quinn wasn't really the household name that she is now. Bane had not been in The Dark Knight Rises, so he isn't really the household name that he is now. But I thought that their choice of villains was really, really good, and each one kind of brought something a little bit different to the table. So I thought that they really nailed it with the selection in this game.
I mean, I think this is the game that kind of put Harley Quinn on the map, right? Like, this is like this appearance is like the beginning of like the modern, you know, look of what we know as Harley Quinn today, right? And then yeah, you have other characters that, like, if you know the comics, like Killer Croc, like, you're like, oh, like, awesome, that's cool. And then really kind of work you that way. Like, like you have the nostalgia for those kind of characters. Poison Ivy is, I think, a pretty mainstream Batman character, but like there's no Penguin, and it wasn't an overstuffed like game, right?
There wasn't, there wasn't like Two-Face or Catwoman or Riddler.
It wasn't all over the place like stuffy, but at the same time, it was very like linchpinned on a lot of those characters. I think it was cool too. Like they kind of drove the narrative of the game, and you get to meet these different bosses and villains who have like they're worried about all these different things. Not all of these different things, but like they have like they're kind of like if Joker's Mother Brain, right? And like you have the different bosses. Yeah. That's kind of how it felt. Where like they're tangentially like working for him in a way, but otherwise just like these creatures got to fight. And then like Poison Ivy's like worried about her plants, and then is like, all right, I'm just gonna go berserk and fight whoever. I'm gonna fight you, Batman, and whatnot. Because like they're inmates in the prison, so like they're working with Joker, but they're also just like threats just by being there. So, but yeah, I agree. Like, it doesn't feel overstuffed. The characters are like they show up and are really cool. The bosses, I think, I liked, but at the same time, could be like in terms of how they fought. Sometimes left a bit to be desired. I think now, like especially 10 years later, now like 11 years later, I think the bosses have a little bit to be desired. Except Killer Croc. That's my favorite boss battle in the whole game. I love that boss battle because you're like walking around on the log like platforms, and he can come around from the water anywhere. Always thought that was a really cool boss fight. But the other two kinds of boss fights you get throughout the rest of the game are you're either in like a small like square room, and there's a big guy who's like 2 or 3 times larger than Batman, who charges at you and does big guy stuff, and you eventually take him down, which is like half the boss battles in this game. And the other half of the boss battles are you're fighting someone really big, and you're like platforming or like running around them or shooting at them from some distance, which were like the Scarecrow boss battles and the Poison Ivy boss battle. The Killer Croc one is like, I feel like if I remember correctly, the only unique boss battle wasn't like that. And then you have a bunch of like the Titan Henchman boss battles, which are very similarly the big guys running at you in a square area. I like the characters, but now playing it 10 years later, maybe it's just me, but I feel like the boss battles didn't age as well. Even the final battle is big Joker running around with henchmen like charging at you, and then throwing some stuff at you and whatnot. And I was like, it was a little bit of an anticlimactic boss battle for me. And
yeah, I want to talk about that.
But
in a
yeah,
quick sec, actually.
I thought the characters were cool, and like how they looked was cool, and how they worked in the story was cool. But the boss battles themselves, other than Killer Croc, and I really like the Scarecrow scenarios, like the whole like tripping and whatnot, and like and the dream sequences he creates are really cool. But the lack of diversity in boss battles didn't age as well as I thought.
I think that's fair. Before we get like really deep into the boss battles, I was gonna ask you like, who are your favorite Batman villains, just like in general?
My favorite Batman villain. See, like that's the thing. I don't know if I like have favorite Batman villains because I'm not like that huge of like a fan of the franchise. But if I had to like pick any, I would say, well, obviously like Joker. Joker's really cool. I like does Slade count as a Batman villain, or is he like a Teen Titans kind of?
I would lump that more Teen Titans, but you know what? This is our show. We can do whatever we want.
I always like Slade. I'm a big fan of Teen Titans. Poison Ivy is cool. Yeah, Two-Face I think is cool. Yeah, like those are, and then like Bane. Oh, and Solomon Grundy.
Yes.
I would use him in Injustice. I would like characters like that. But like again, I'm not like who's my favorite Batman villain. I don't really have like a one I could easily pick.
Okay, that's fair. I was wondering because like some of my favorite villains are like Joker, Poison Ivy is up there, Scarecrow is up there, Two-Face is up there,
Scarecrow's cool.
Bane is in there. So like for me, like a lot of my favorite villains like were in this game.
Yeah.
So it was hitting 100 for me. I remember when it came out. But I do want to dig into the boss battles and go over those a little bit because I kind of agree with you in a sense. Where like I think that the Bane boss battle is really fun. You have the big man running at you. You got like kind of frantically you're trying to beat up other people while like jumping out of the way when he's charging at you. But I will agree that they just recycle that boss battle multiple times later in the game when you have the enemies on the Titan formula. So I thought that like the first time with Bane was really fun, but it kind of was diminished, the more that you do it, especially because you're fighting Bane, and then you're fighting no-name Titan soldier.
Yeah,
so.
you fight the Titan guys like 2 or 3 separate times, as well as Bane, and it was like, oh, these fights again. It's always like the same. Like I think too, it's because it's like 10, 11 years later, where I feel like even back then, like the combat itself in Arkham Asylum was, I think, pretty innovative. But those boss battles feel like they kind of been around for a little bit. But even if they hadn't, like now 10 years later, I feel like I've played so many games with those kind of bosses that now going back to this one, I'm like, Jesus, this is like, it was too much at times. I think they definitely lost their flair and fun, quality the second or third or fourth time playing through that.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you. I would push back though on the Poison Ivy boss battle. I think that one is cool. Really fun. That one is like the most Metroid-y to me, because she's got like this giant plant, and like there's tentacles swinging around, and like they hit the ground and they produce like thorns which can gobble up Batman. Like you got to shoot her right in the eye, while also beating up thugs. I thought that one was like really fun actually, and like definitely reminded me of like Metroid Prime. Kind of reminded me of like Flagra almost when I was fighting it. And that one I really like. But I also just like, I really like Poison Ivy, the character, too. So I was going to be partial to that.
No, I agree. I like those. I think those boss battles were cool. Like that like the bigger, huge enemy boss battles were cool as well. I think I just wanted more boss battle diversity overall. But the individual boss battles, more or less, like there were some cool ones. I like the Poison Ivy one. There was a bit of a build up to it. She's a cool character, and it was a fun boss battle. And at least in Metroid, like a lot of the boss battles, like some you love, some you hate, but they're memorable a lot of the time. And
oh yeah,
I think there's some characters that like are very memorable, show up all the time. And in this one, I think all the boss battles are pretty memorable. Like again, going back to Scarecrow, the Scarecrow sequences, that was one where I didn't mind the repeated boss battle, because like you had the first one where you're going through this big dream sequence, and the second one where you go through like his parents dying, and you're playing as like young Batman as a kid, and you're like walking around down the alley, and I'm like, oh Jesus. And then the third one where you're walking around as Joker, and like that kind of stuff was really cool, because it makes you forget that like, okay, you're playing the same boss battle for a third time. I think the other ones, like the big room boss battles, didn't have that same kind of like setup and like character as those did. But like, Scarecrow is such a cool character, like such an definitely. Well, I would definitely up there for me in terms of Batman villains as well, and at least in this game, like, those were very standout sequences for sure.
His look too in this game is just so good. He has like the gas mask and like the needle fingers. He looks as scary as he's ever looked. I thought he looked great. Those sequences are fantastic. Like it's definitely like style over substance, but I think it's so stylish that like it doesn't really matter to me. And I know that the Scarecrow sequences were like what everybody was kind of talking about when the game came out, and like how great they were. But like, man, it really just bears repeating. Like they were so good. They were so good that they brought back Scarecrow for Arkham Knight, and like really, based the entire crux of the game off of what Scarecrow's fear gas does to Batman. So I really love that sequence, and I agree with you. Actually, I really liked the Killer Croc boss battle as well. It's not even like a boss battle per se, but like he's chasing after you. Like, you've got to fend him off, and it was just such a different way to present like a boss battle, and I think it was so much more effective than like actually like fighting him with your fists. Again, you feel like you've outsmarted him.
Right. That was the thing, is that when that initially happened, I was very relieved, playing it again, because I didn't remember off the top of my head how the fight went until like it started happening, So like you get down there in the sewers, and I was like thinking to myself like, oh, I'm just fighting Killer Croc here, and like thinking like, oh, it's gonna be one of those, he's gonna charge at me fights, I'm gonna end up in some room. But then like you're going around collecting the spores, and like you don't know where he's gonna pop up, and then you gotta stun him real quick. Like it's such like an anxiety ridden fight. It was not only so different, but like it really made you like one of the few times in the game where like even though you're Batman, like you still kind of feel like, oh damn, like I could lose, or I could get bodied here. I could get taken out by Killer Croc, which would be no bueno. That would not be good. And, I don't want that to happen. And anytime I was, like, walking around, even, like, in the beginning, Batman's, like, gotta be, like, walking around quiet here. Any kind of disturbance in the water, Killer Croc's come and eat me. And I'm like, oh, great, thanks, dude. Like, I appreciate that. Like, thanks for the warning. And there's a bunch of spores you gotta collect, too. I think there's, like, distinctly remember a couple times I'd be like, I need, like, I got a couple. I'm like, all right, let me get out of here. And Batman's like, oh, that's not enough. I need some more. I'm like, ah. All right, and then inching around. Yeah, that's really one of the most standout sequences for me in the game. I really liked what they did, and then having Killer Croc take out Scarecrow at the end right there, which was also a great end as well.
That was great. I thought it was like really creepy when you actually saw Scarecrow in person.
Right? Yeah.
And I don't know why, but like it was just like, oh my god, like he's actually here. It's just kind of like this ghoul that just appears and like he's here somewhere, but he's not around anywhere. I don't know. Seeing him pop up was like, ugh, creepy.
Oh, 100%.
So yeah, I love that. All right, one last boss fight, or actually maybe before we get to the last boss fight, I will say in my last playthrough, I went and I got 100% of the Riddler trophies. I got 100% of everything in this game. I was having a great time. So I sent the Riddler to jail. He got arrested, so R.I.P. to him. But I will say, you've kind of alluded to it for a couple different times now on the show about the last boss battle with the Joker. This would be my second biggest critique of this game. Is like this just feels like I don't know, not a good send off or not a good final boss battle to me for this game, because you have it kind of feels a little bit cheap to me almost, because you have Joker transforming into this Titan monster and like it's just like, I don't know, I would have liked to face off against the Joker and like outwit him rather than beat him up, kind of like we were just talking about with Croc. I do think it's weird that he's transformed but his voice stays the same.
Yeah.
I think that in the fight he's like taunting to the media also, which I'm just like, come on, man. Like, I don't know. This one didn't really hit home for me. Like you were fighting the goons more so than you were fighting anyone else. And again, it was kind of another one of it was a rehash of the Bane fight, which you've already had rehashed like a couple different times. And like literally you did directly before you got to this fight with the Joker. So I never really liked the final confrontation in Arkham Asylum. And I didn't like it again when I played it here, unfortunately.
I think this whole thing with like Joker transforming was, I kind of, again, this is one of those things where I hadn't played the game in a while, so I had to like I needed my memory refreshed. So as I was going through the game, I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. Like, okay, like yeah, that makes sense. And when we were getting towards the end of the game, I was remembering, I was like, oh yeah, like this is like he transforms, and I was thinking like, I guess it's the logical progression of the story. Like for some reason, Joker wants to create an army of like Bane-like soldiers, but like won't need to have like all that like stuff on like strapped to him all the time. Like he'll be able to just like inject them, they're good to go. He has this huge army, which like in and of itself didn't feel like a very Joker-y kind of motivation, right? Like Joker's a character who wants to like sow chaos and like be a nuisance and like do like these terrible like gruesome kind of twisted things that are personal and whatnot, and like creating like an army of super soldiers just feels like such a generic like villain thing that doesn't really like feel very Joker specific. But anyway, so when that fails because Batman just beats up more of like enough of them or whatever it is, like he's like, all right, like that's not gonna work because Batman can just throw hands with them and win, so clearly they're not that great. He like, yeah, it gets, well, first of all, Batman like he gets injected, like he stops like he jumps in front of like the dart that Joker shoots, and like through sheer willpower suppresses like the venom like strain so he doesn't get transformed, which I thought was really funny. And then Joker,
he does inject himself with the antidote, to be fair.
He does, but before that,
eventually
but eventually he does, because then Joker's like, oh, you use the antidote on yourself and not on me. And then the boss fight starts. But yeah, like there's a solid 30 seconds where he's just through sheer willpower like suppressing this stuff, which I was like, wow, Batman is, what a guy. This guy is just the strongest. He's the best. Anyway, yeah, Joker, like I was a little shocked. I was like, wait, does Joker like not survive this game? Because when he injects himself, he turns into this crazy huge monster where like his spine is like jetting out of his back, and he's like his whole body is like grotesquely like metamorphosized and whatnot, and he looks all crazy. So I'm thinking, okay, you must kill him here, at least from what I remember, because like, how do you come back from this? Like, how does your body go back to normal after like your spine poking through your back and you getting 5 feet tall, like, you know, like. And then you beat him, and at the end of the game, he's like back to regular normal size. Yeah, it didn't. That also injecting himself and making him a super beast didn't seem very Joker-like either. And then yeah, you get this boss fight that didn't seem also very Joker-like. You're not outsmarting him. You're not like uncovering like some kind of like bomb somewhere and in some crazy scenario. You're just in another arena fight where he's like a big guy and you're fighting other henchmen, and you got to pull him down from above the arena. And yeah, he's like, you know, mouthing off and hot dogging to the media and all that. And like, what are you like trying to do here? Are you trying to like, I don't get all that. Yeah, it was kind of a weird boss fight. Wasn't my favorite thing. I certainly think the boss fights were one of the weaker aspects of the game, and I kind of wish there was a better ending to it. And so yeah, I think you're right on the money with all that.
I will say that I think that the follow-up to this boss fight was excellent in Arkham City, where like Joker is sick and like dying, and like the payoff at the end of that game I think is like fantastic. It's such a fantastic ending for like Joker and Batman and whatever, but like you do have to wait till you get to Arkham City, unfortunately, to get that. So it's a little bit too bad, and it's a little bit too bad as well that like, you know, Arkham City kind of moved into the more open world Assassin's Creed-esque kind of direction and moved away from the more self-contained like Metroidvania Arkham Asylum style, and the Arkham games have kind of stayed there ever since. So, you know, we probably won't ever get a chance to cover, you know, Arkham City or Arkham Knights or Origins on Inspired by Metroid again. So it really is like kind of this one and done perfect storm of Arkham Asylum. But, you know, I really think that like I think the 3D Metroidvania games are inherently harder to do than 2D Metroidvania games, and I think that this is just such a good example of how to do it properly, how to embrace the things that make that genre so successful, but still like have your own history, your own lore, your own legs to stand on as well. You know, I loved it back then. I loved playing it now. I had such a good time, and I'm really glad that you know, that we had this kind of suggested as the next, you know, Inspired by Metroid game that we got to cover, because I forgot like how much I loved this game.
Yeah, it really is such a good game. Like, this 2009 was such a good year for games. A lot of good games came out back then. I mean, well, games come out, a lot of good games come out every year, but you know, it was 11, 10 years ago, right? Like, that's a throwback at this point. It's not a retro game, but it's been around for a while, and it's certainly not only to a degree influenced by, you know, Metroidvania games and other games as well, but has influenced so many other games that have come out afterward, that it's a game that people still go back to this day, as we are, and revisit because it is that good. And it's like a game that's still referenced to this day and cited as an influence for game developers and other games that are coming out. So I'm glad we could go back to this. Like, overall, how inspired do you think this game was? I want to say, because I forget how exactly we got the suggestion. It was either that someone just like thought, I forget how we got it to it, and I want to almost say that someone found a comment about like someone being involved in the game saying it literally was inspired by Metroid, but I don't want to say that and then that being taken as fact, because I don't know. I don't remember. I forget now because we had put this off for so long, like what exactly inspired us to do this as an Inspired by Metroid game. And if you can...
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think that somebody, and again, I don't know that this actually is fact or not, but somebody basically told us, so this is secondhand information, that like somebody that worked at Rocksteady was like, yeah, we looked at the Metroid series of games when we were constructing the world of Arkham Island.
I think that's what happened. Maybe someone who's listening will be like, yeah, that definitely did happen, or no, that definitely didn't happen. What are you talking about? But I would say from playing the game that it's evident, right? Like, if you play Arkham Asylum, like, it is its own thing, and it takes from all different kinds of sources, right? But there are a lot of different, you know, Metroidvania elements in terms of how you progress through the game, how you play it, how you approach certain scenarios, how you gather information, and all of that really spoke to the Metroid fan in me. So I personally, for me, Andy, I would say that this is a game that like maybe isn't like 100% directly inspired by Metroidvania games, but there are definitely Metroidvania elements that seem that they were that didn't just like they aren't coincidental. Like I think they certainly have an inspired way about them. So how inspired do you think this game is, or do you think it's just a coincidence?
No. I think it's very inspired.
Yeah.
And like I was saying, like it's way harder to like do a 3D Metroidvania, and because like you can look at the map of Hollow Knight and be like, oh yeah, this looks like the map of Super Metroid. Like obviously this is the same genre and it's inspired by kind of the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. And you have that immediate like similarity, but whereas like this one you have to look a little bit deeper and look around at like the construction of the world and like the progression of the items that you get and the amount of like things that there are to do that you can't do right away and you have to come back to. I think that like this has all of the hallmarks of a Metroidvania game and a good Metroidvania game. So I would say to everyone that is listening to this, go and fire up Arkham Asylum. Like fire it up. It's probably like $5 at your local pawn shop or something like that, and play through it. Not only because it's a great game, but play through it with the lens of like, okay, what about this reminds me of playing Metroid? And I think that you'll probably be surprised at the amount of stuff that you see that you're just like, oh yeah, like this reminds me of scanning something in Metroid Prime, or like this reminds me of an area in Super Metroid where I finally got the item I needed and I came back and I got this upgrade or whatever, right? Like there's a lot on the table that's really similar to, some of the best Metroidvanias out there that we play. So yeah, I think it's very much shares the same DNA, and it's a little bit too bad that the sequels moved away from that, but we'll always have Arkham Asylum. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. The DNA is a great way to put it. It has the genes, right? They've been passed down, and yeah, it made for a really great game. I'm glad we were able to go and revisit it, and if anything, enjoy what is, certainly inspired in a way, but otherwise just a really solid video game experience. It's a game I feel like this is a gamer's game. You gotta play this. Like you play video games, this is a game I feel like you don't gotta pass up, no matter like whether you played it back then or you never got around to it, or you weren't playing games back then, or you just didn't know, like, or you just passed it up because you don't like Batman. Like this is a game you gotta play, and even as a Metroid fan, I think too. Yeah, it's a game that you sit down and you'll think like, oh yeah, this is reminds me of what it is to also play Metroid, but in a way it does its own thing too, and it makes for a really fun new experience you might not have tried before. So yeah, I'm glad we were able to go back to this, because Arkham Asylum is one of the best. I think this is one of the best like comic book games, and it has a case for being one of the best games, I think, like of its generation for sure.
Yeah, I think that you could make a case for this being the best licensed game ever. Maybe GoldenEye would also be in that conversation for an older generation, but this would be up there, if not number one. And to be honest, I'm probably going to go play Arkham City now, because I want to keep going with the story.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts before we get out of here, Dak?
I think only other closing thoughts. I'm trying to think of anything I might have missed in my notes here that I might have wanted to mention. Trying to think. This game definitely reminded me, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but like this game reminded me a little bit of Metroid Fusion, because there's a lot of talking at me at times. Like, at least as you said, you can move around while people are talking at you, you're listening to something, but there is a lot of talking in this game. Like maybe that's one thing that's not like Metroid. There's just so much talking. There are times where I was kind of walking around and playing, and there's just always someone in my ear explaining something, Oracle saying something, or you're listening to something, or Joker is just mouthing off over and over again. I thought that was one thing when I was playing. I was like, well, this is certainly not like a Metroid game. Like the amount of talking in this one area is enough for the entire franchise. And yeah, that's the only thing I could think of. It definitely had that kind of feel, and having like the objectives too, like kind of being told where to go here and there, which I don't think is always a bad thing. Sometimes it's nice to be told like what tools you have and how to use them, but also there are a lot of ways to explore and play the game your own way. And definitely when you approach the game, make the best use of all of Batman's tools, because he has a lot of them. And even though I went in a lot of the time just kind of like hitting people, sometimes you gotta go for the stealthy kill or do some crazy gadget stuff. That's just as satisfying. So yeah, great game.
Whoa. Batman doesn't kill. Come on, pal.
Well, you know what I'm saying. Like,
come on, pal.
Stealth takedown, and they lie on the ground as if they're dead. Sorry.
Final thought for me, I can't wait to play Gotham Knights. That's literally my dream game. Playing Nightwing, Robin, Batgirl, Red Hood. Sign me up. I am very excited and looking forward to that. And we hope that you guys dug this episode on Batman Arkham Asylum. And we hope that you fire it up and give it another playthrough for anybody that, like me, hasn't played it in close to 10 years. Because it's worth the replay. That's going to do it for us. We are going to get out of here, of course. We want you guys to check us out over on Podbean and iTunes and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Go and like and subscribe to the Omega Metroid podcast and tell that Metroid fan in your life where they can get their weekly Metroid fix. Check us out over on Twitter. I am at Spiteri316. Dak is at DakCity_, and we are at Omega Metroid Pod. Until next week, everyone, we will see you then.